I was standing in my parents' kitchen showing them my engagement ring when my sister Natalie walked in and announced she was getting married in 3 months. Same year as me. Same season. My mother's face lit up in a way it never had when I'd shared my news 2 weeks earlier. "Oh, that's wonderful, darling," she gushed, hugging Natalie. Then she turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Honey, you understand we can't afford to help with 2 weddings in 1 year. We'll have to focus on Natalie's since hers is first." My father nodded agreement. "You've always been more independent anyway. You'll figure something out." I stood there holding my ring, watching my parents choose my sister over me for the 1,000th time in my life. They had no idea I'd been running a successful tech startup for 5 years. They didn't know I'd just sold it for $40 million. They'd never asked about my career because they were too busy focusing on Natalie. So I smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll handle my own wedding." And I did. I got married at my $7 million villa in Tuscany that I'd bought with cash 3 months earlier, a villa my family didn't know existed. I invited 200 guests, none of them family. The wedding was featured in Vogue. And when my parents finally saw the photos and realized what I'd hidden from them, what happened next destroyed my family in ways none of us saw coming. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and let me know where you're viewing from. I want to know I'm not the only one whose parents picked the golden child over them one too many times. My name is Celeste Morgan and I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, with my parents Jonathan and Marie, and my younger sister Natalie, who's 27. On the surface, we looked like a normal middle-class family. Dad worked as a manager at a manufacturing plant. Mom was a part-time bookkeeper. We had a nice house in the suburbs, took modest vacations, lived comfortably but not extravagantly. What wasn't visible from the outside was the clear favoritism that had defined my entire childhood. Natalie was the pretty one, the charming one, the one who made friends easily and fit every conventional expectation. I was the awkward one, the one with my nose in books, the one who asked too many questions and didn't care about the things teenage girls were supposed to care about. Before I tell you about the wedding that changed everything and the secret life my parents never knew about, hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about invisible children who became successful and the moment their families realized what they'd overlooked. These stories might help you see the gold children in your life differently. Growing up, the difference in treatment was constant, but subtle enough that I couldn't quite articulate it. When Natalie wanted dance lessons, Mom drove her to classes 3 times a week. When I wanted coding camp, I was told it was too expensive and I could learn online for free. When Natalie made the cheerleading squad, Dad threw a party. When I won the state science fair, they came to the ceremony, but left early because Natalie had a date. "You don't need the same attention Natalie does," Mom would say when I complained. "You're self-sufficient. She needs more support." What they meant was, "She's worth the effort, you're not." I learned early that I couldn't rely on my parents for anything that mattered. So I stopped trying. I got a job at 15, saved every penny, put myself through community college while Natalie went to a private university on our parents' dime. I transferred to a state school for my bachelor's in computer science, working full-time while taking classes, while my parents paid Natalie's rent in her sorority house. "It's not that we love her more," Dad said when I asked why they funded her entire college experience, but gave me nothing. "It's that she needs more help getting started. You've always been able to take care of yourself." By the time I was 25, I'd started a software company with 2 college friends. We developed a platform for small businesses to manage their operations, and it took off faster than we'd imagined. Within 3 years, we had 5,000 clients and were generating serious revenue. Within 5 years, we were bought out by a major tech company for $40 million. My share was $15 million after taxes. At 30 years old, I was wealthy beyond anything my parents could imagine. And I never told them. Not because I was hiding it maliciously, but because they'd never asked about my life. Never asked what I did for work beyond something with computers. Never showed interest in my accomplishments. So I simply didn't volunteer the information. I bought the villa in Tuscany on a whim during a solo vacation to Italy. It was a restored 18th century estate on 20 acres, with vineyard views, a pool, gardens, and enough space to host a small wedding. $7 million, paid in cash. I hired local staff to maintain it and visited 3 times a year, finding peace in a place my family knew nothing about. My fiancé Dante was Italian, which was fitting. I'd met him 2 years earlier in Florence at an art gallery opening. He was a successful architect, came from old money, and understood what it was like to have complicated family dynamics. His family was warm and welcoming in ways mine had never been. They'd embraced me immediately, never questioned my worth, celebrated my success. When Dante proposed in Paris 6 months ago, I called my parents excitedly to share the news. I drove to their house the next day with my ring, ready to talk about wedding plans. My mother looked at the ring with mild interest. "That's lovely, dear. When are you thinking?" "Probably next fall. September or October. I wanted to check with you first about dates." "Well, your father and I have been saving up to help with your wedding," Mom said, though I'd never asked them to. "We've set aside about $15,000. It's not much, but combined with what you and Dante contribute, you should be able to have something nice." $15,000. The same amount they'd spent on Natalie's sorority fees for 1 year. But I smiled and thanked them, not mentioning that my dress alone would cost more than that. That's when Natalie walked in. She'd been living with our parents for the past 6 months, finding herself after quitting her third job in 2 years. She'd been engaged before, twice actually, both times ending badly. Now she announced she was engaged again to a man named Trevor she'd been dating for 4 months. "We're getting married in June," she squealed. Small ceremony, just family and close friends, then a big reception. We're thinking the River House, that gorgeous venue downtown. My mother's reaction was night and day from when I'd announced my engagement. She grabbed Natalie, jumping up and down, crying happy tears. My father beamed, immediately asking about Trevor's job, his family, their plans. "This is so exciting," Mom gushed. Then she turned to me, her expression shifting to apologetic. "Honey, you understand we can't help financially with 2 weddings in 1 year. We'll need to focus our resources on Natalie's wedding since hers is happening first. You've always been more independent anyway," Dad added. "You'll figure something out. You're good at that." I stood there, engagement ring catching the light, watching the scene I'd witnessed 1,000 times in different forms. Natalie getting everything, me getting excuses. The difference was, this time I had options they couldn't imagine. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "I'll handle my own wedding." Over the next 3 months, I watched my parents pour everything into Natalie's wedding. They funded the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer. They went into debt, took out a loan against their house, spent close to $60,000 making sure Natalie had her dream wedding. They asked me occasionally how my planning was going. I told them it was going well, that Dante and I were keeping it simple, probably something small in Italy since that's where we met. They seemed relieved they wouldn't have to travel far or spend money they didn't have. What I didn't tell them was that I'd hired one of the top wedding planners in Europe. That 200 guests would be flying to Tuscany, all expenses paid by me. That Vera Wang had designed my dress. That the reception would feature a Michelin-starred chef. That the whole event would cost close to $1 million and be photographed for Vogue Italia. Natalie's wedding happened in June, exactly as planned. It was lovely in a conventional way. Pretty venue, decent food, standard ceremony. I attended with Dante, played the supportive sister, gave a toast, smiled for photos. My parents glowed with pride all evening, introducing Natalie and Trevor to everyone, talking about what a beautiful couple they made. "Your wedding will be nice too," Mom said to me at one point, patting my arm. "Simple can be elegant." "I'm sure it will be perfect for you," Natalie added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd always been competitive with me, always needed to be the center of attention. For months later, in October, Dante and I got married at my villa in Tuscany. My parents weren't invited. Neither was Natalie. I invited friends, colleagues, Dante's large Italian family, mentors who'd supported my career, even my former business partners who'd helped me build the company. But not a single member of my biological family. The wedding was everything I dreamed. The ceremony took place in the villa's garden at sunset, with views of the Tuscan hills. My dress was custom Vera Wang, a masterpiece of lace and silk. The reception featured food from one of Italy's most celebrated chefs. A string quartet played during dinner, followed by a band that had performed at European royal weddings. Vogue Italia covered the entire event. The photos were stunning, capturing every detail: the villa, the grounds, the guests, the food, the dress, everything. The article called it one of the most elegant weddings of the season and mentioned that the bride was a successful tech entrepreneur who'd recently sold her company for tens of millions. The magazine hit stands 2 weeks after the wedding. I was on my honeymoon in the Maldives when my phone started blowing up. My mother called 17 times in 1 hour. My father sent a dozen texts. Natalie left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to hysterical. I didn't answer. I was on a private island with my husband, and I wasn't ready to deal with them yet. When we returned from the honeymoon, I found emails, letters, more voicemails, all saying variations of the same thing. How could you not invite us? How could you hide this from us? How could you have that kind of money and not tell us? How could you let us struggle with Natalie's wedding when you could have helped? That last one particularly irritated me. I could have helped, but I'd never been asked. More importantly, they'd explicitly told me they were focusing their resources on Natalie, that I'd have to handle my own wedding. So I waited 2 more weeks before driving to Portland to face them. I didn't call first, just showed up at their house on a Saturday afternoon. They were all there, my parents and Natalie, sitting in the living room looking at the Vogue spread for probably the 100th time. "You came," Mom said when she opened the door. Her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "You called me 50 times. Seemed like you wanted to talk." I walked into the living room. The magazine was spread across the coffee table, photos of my wedding on every page. Natalie looked at me with pure hatred. "Explain this," Dad said, pointing at the magazine. "Explain how you had $1 million wedding while we went into debt for Natalie's." "You told me to handle my own wedding," I said calmly. "So I did." "You lied to us," Natalie spat. "You said you were having something small." I said simple. The wedding was simple in concept, just elevated in execution. "Don't play word games," Mom said. "You deliberately hid your wealth from us. You watched us struggle financially and said nothing." "You never asked," I replied. "Not once in 5 years did you ask how my business was doing. You never asked about the sale. You never showed any interest in my career. You were too busy focusing on Natalie to notice what I was accomplishing. Because Natalie needed more support." Dad's voice rose. "You were always fine on your own." "No, I had to be fine on my own because you gave me no choice. There's a difference." "We gave you everything," Mom said, tears starting. "We raised you, fed you, sent you to college. You paid for Natalie's college. I paid for mine. You funded her sorority, her apartment, her lifestyle. I worked full-time while taking classes. Because you could handle it. Or because you didn't want to make the effort for me like you did for her." I looked at each of them. "You told me you couldn't afford to help with my wedding because you were focusing on Natalie's. You made a choice. I accepted that choice and handled my own wedding. Now you're angry because my wedding was nicer than hers. You should have told us about the money," Natalie said. "You should have helped us." "Why? So you could have an even bigger wedding? So Mom and Dad could take credit for my success? So you could all benefit from the daughter and sister you never valued?" "That's not fair," Mom protested. "We love you. You love the idea of me," I corrected. "But you never actually saw me. Never asked about my dreams, my struggles, my accomplishments. You were too busy with Natalie to notice I'd built a successful company, sold it for millions, and created a life you couldn't imagine." I stood to leave. Dad blocked my path. "You owe us an explanation for why we weren't invited to your wedding." "I don't owe you anything. But I'll tell you anyway. You weren't invited because for 31 years, you made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was the consolation prize child, the one who was fine being ignored because Natalie needed the attention. I wanted my wedding day to be filled with people who actually value me, who celebrate my happiness, who've been there for me. You 3 have never been those people. We're your family," Mom said desperately. "Biology doesn't make you family. Love and support make you family. And you've never given me those things the way you gave them to Natalie." I moved past Dad and headed for the door. Natalie followed me. "You're selfish," she said. "You're punishing us because you're jealous that Mom and Dad love me more." I turned to look at her. "I'm not jealous, Natalie. I'm free. Free from needing approval from people who'll never give it. Free from competing for scraps of attention while you got the feast. Free from the family that made me invisible. You're going to regret this, she threatened. You're going to need us someday, and we won't be there. I've never had you there, so nothing will change. I left and drove back to the airport. Dante and I were living in San Francisco now, in a penthouse with views of the bay. Far enough from Portland that surprise visits would be difficult. Over the next few months, my family tried various approaches. My mother sent long emails about how hurt she was, how family should forgive each other, how I was being cruel and punishing. My father tried the guilt angle, talking about how hard they'd worked to raise me, how ungrateful I was being. Natalie sent nasty messages calling me every name she could think of. I blocked them all eventually. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I was building a new life with Dante, starting a new company, creating a future that had nothing to do with people who'd never seen my value. Then 6 months after my wedding, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Celeste? It's your Aunt Ruth. My father's sister, someone I hadn't heard from in years. Hi, Aunt Ruth. What's wrong? It's your parents. They're in serious financial trouble. The loan they took against the house for Natalie's wedding, they can't make the payments. The bank is foreclosing. They're going to lose everything. I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't understand why you're calling me. Because you're their daughter and you have the means to help them. Your mother called me crying, saying they reached out to you but you've blocked them. Celeste, they're going to be homeless. They made choices that led to this situation. They chose to spend $60,000 on Natalie's wedding despite not being able to afford it. They chose to tell me they couldn't help with my wedding so they could focus on hers. Those were their choices. But you can help them now. You have millions. I do. And I'm using those millions to build my business, support charities I care about, and live my life. Not to bail out people who spent my entire childhood making me feel worthless. They're your parents, Celeste. Family takes care of family. Family should have taken care of me 31 years ago. They didn't. Now I'm taking care of myself and the people who actually treated me like family. You're going to let them lose their home out of spite? I'm going to let them face the consequences of their choices. Just like I had to face consequences of every choice I made growing up without their support. I hung up and blocked Aunt Ruth's number too. I felt guilty for about 10 minutes, then remembered all the times I'd needed support and got none. All the times Natalie got everything while I got excuses. All the times my accomplishments were ignored while her mediocrity was celebrated. 2 weeks later, another call from an unknown number. This time I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a lawyer representing my parents. They were suing me for financial support, claiming I had a moral and legal obligation to help them since I had the means. I called my own lawyer, a shark of a woman named Veronica who'd handled my business sale. Can they do this? I asked. They can try. But they won't win. Adult children have no legal obligation to support their parents unless the parents are incapacitated and have no other means. Your parents are both able-bodied and employed. Their financial problems are self-created. Any decent judge will throw this out. What about the moral obligation argument? Morality isn't legally enforceable. They'd have to prove you owe them a duty of care, and given that they explicitly told you they couldn't help with your wedding while funding your sister's, they've demonstrated they don't believe in equal treatment of children. That actually helps your case. The lawsuit proceeded anyway. My parents claimed I'd been secretive about my wealth deliberately to avoid helping them. They argued that families should support each other in times of need. They even tried to use the wedding as evidence, saying I'd flaunted my wealth while knowing they were struggling. The case went to court 4 months later. I attended with Veronica, dressed professionally, prepared to defend myself. My parents showed up with their budget lawyer and Natalie, who apparently thought her presence would help somehow. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Flores, read through the case file before the hearing started. When proceedings began, she looked at my parents' lawyer. "Counselor, help me understand your client's position. They're suing their daughter for financial support, claiming she has a moral obligation to help them. But your clients explicitly told their daughter they couldn't help with her wedding because they needed to focus resources on their other daughter's wedding. How do you reconcile those positions?" My parents' lawyer stumbled. "Your Honor, the circumstances were different. They wanted to help both daughters but had limited resources. Limited resources that they spent on one daughter to the exclusion of the other, Judge Flores interrupted. Then they're upset that the excluded daughter succeeded financially without them and isn't sharing that success. Is that accurate? Your Honor, family is about supporting each other. Was Ms. Celeste Morgan supported by her family? Did her parents fund her education the way they funded her sister's? Well, no, but did they help with her wedding? They couldn't afford to help both. So they chose to help one and not the other. And now the one they didn't help is successful, and they want access to that success. Do I have that right? Your Honor, with respect, they're her parents. There's a moral duty. Moral duties run both ways, Counselor. Parents have a moral duty to treat their children with equal care and support. Did your clients meet that duty? The hearing lasted 20 minutes. Judge Flores denied my parents' claim completely, stating that they'd failed to demonstrate any legal basis for compelling adult children to provide financial support, especially when those children had received unequal treatment growing up. The plaintiffs made choices about how to allocate their resources, Judge Flores said in her ruling. They chose to heavily invest in one child's wedding while telling the other child to manage independently. The defendant did exactly that. She managed independently and succeeded beyond expectations. The plaintiffs cannot now demand access to success they didn't support simply because they face financial difficulties from their own choices. My parents left the courthouse devastated. Natalie shot me a look of pure hatred as they walked past. I felt nothing watching them go. But the story didn't end there. 3 months after the lawsuit was dismissed, I got an email from Natalie. The subject line was, "You win." The email was short. Mom and Dad lost the house. They're moving into a rental apartment, and they're miserable. Trevor left me, by the way. Turns out he was cheating the whole time. The marriage lasted 6 months. So the wedding they spent $60,000 on was for a relationship that didn't even make it to our first anniversary. I hope you're happy. You got to punish us, and it worked. We're all suffering while you live in your mansion and pretend we don't exist. Congratulations. I read it twice and then deleted it. Because here's what Natalie would never understand. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. I was choosing to invest my energy and resources in people who valued me, rather than endlessly trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their effort. 6 months later, I got a letter. Physical mail, forwarded from my old address. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Dear Celeste, I'm writing because calling hasn't worked and I don't blame you for blocking us. I want you to know that your father and I are going to counseling. Our therapist has helped us see how unfairly we treated you throughout your life. We convinced ourselves that because you were independent and capable, you didn't need the same support Natalie did. We were wrong. We see that now. Natalie's marriage fell apart, which was devastating for her but also eye-opening for us. We spent so much money, went into so much debt, for a wedding that celebrated a relationship that wasn't real. Meanwhile, you built a real life, with a real partner, and created real success, all without our help. Actually, despite our lack of help. I'm not asking you to forgive us or to give us money or to fix our financial problems. I'm just asking you to know that we see our mistakes. We see how we failed you. And we're sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. If you ever decide you want a relationship with us, on whatever terms you set, we'll be here. But if you don't, we understand. We hope you're happy. We hope Dante treats you well. We hope your new business is successful. And we hope someday you can forgive us, even if you never want to see us again. Love, Mom. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and didn't respond. Because apologies are nice, but they don't undo 31 years of being overlooked. They don't erase the pain of watching your parents choose your sister over you repeatedly. They don't fix the damage of growing up feeling invisible in your own family. 1 year after my wedding, Dante and I found out I was pregnant. We were thrilled, terrified, excited. We started preparing the nursery in our San Francisco penthouse, picking out furniture, imagining our future as parents. And for the first time since leaving Portland, I thought about my family. Not about reconciling necessarily, but about what kind of family I wanted to create for my child. Did I want my daughter to grow up without grandparents because I couldn't forgive mine? Did I want her to never know her aunt, even if that aunt had treated me terribly? I talked to Dante about it. His family was large and close-knit, and they'd embraced me completely. "Whatever you decide, I support," he said. "But I think children benefit from having more people who love them if those people are capable of love." "That's the question," I said. "Are they capable of loving me now, or would they just be using my child to gain access to my life?" Only one way to find out. I thought about it for weeks. Finally, when I was 5 months pregnant, I sent my mother an email. Short and direct. "I'm having a baby. A girl. Due in March. I'm not promising a relationship, but if you and Dad want to meet your granddaughter, we can arrange supervised visits after she's born. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you or that things will go back to normal. But I'm willing to see if you've actually changed. If you hurt me or my daughter the way you hurt me, this ends immediately. Those are my terms." My mother responded within an hour. "Yes. Thank you. We'll respect any boundaries you set. We just want a chance." The baby was born in March, a beautiful girl we named Isabella. My parents came to San Francisco 2 weeks later to meet her. They stayed in a hotel, visited for 2 hours, held their granddaughter, and cried. "She's beautiful," Mom whispered, tears streaming. "She looks like you did as a baby." "Thank you for letting us meet her," Dad said. "We don't deserve this chance, but we're grateful for it." They didn't ask about money, didn't push for more time, didn't overstep. They followed every boundary I set. And slowly, very slowly, we began building something new. Not the relationship we'd had, that was irreparably broken. But something different, something based on my terms, with my boundaries, where I was valued rather than overlooked. Natalie reached out 6 months later, asking if she could meet Isabella. I said no. Because while I was willing to give my parents a second chance, Natalie had never shown any remorse for how she'd treated me. She'd only complained about consequences, never acknowledged her role in creating them. "That's not fair," she wrote back. "I'm her aunt. Fair would have been you treating me like a sister instead of competition for 30 years. Fair would have been you supporting my success instead of resenting it. Fair would have been you acknowledging that our parents treated me poorly instead of benefiting from that treatment. You've never done any of those things. So no, you don't get access to my daughter." She didn't respond after that. Now, 3 years after that Vogue wedding my family wasn't invited to, I'm living in San Francisco with my husband and daughter. My parents visit once every few months, always respectful of boundaries, always careful not to overstep. We're building a relationship slowly, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My business is thriving, a new startup focused on educational technology for underserved communities. I'm using my wealth to create opportunities for people who remind me of myself, people who have potential but lack support. The villa in Tuscany is still there, and we visit several times a year. Isabella loves it, running through the gardens, playing in the vineyard. It's her heritage, a symbol of what her mother built when everyone said she'd never amount to anything. People ask me sometimes if I regret excluding my family from my wedding. If I regret letting my parents face foreclosure. If I regret keeping Natalie away from my daughter. The answer is always no. Because here's what I learned from being overlooked my entire childhood: you teach people how to treat you. When I kept accepting crumbs of attention while Natalie got the feast, I taught my parents that was acceptable. When I funded my own education and wedding and success without complaining, I taught them I didn't need them. The wedding was my declaration of independence. Me finally saying, "I've built a life without you, a beautiful life, and you're not entitled to be part of it just because we share DNA. You have to earn that through actual care and support, not through obligation and guilt." My parents are earning it now slowly. They may never fully understand the damage they did, but they're trying to do better. That's enough for supervised visits with their granddaughter. It's not enough for full reconciliation, and it may never be. Natalie will probably never earn it, and I'm at peace with that. Some relationships are too toxic to salvage, too broken to rebuild. The Vogue wedding wasn't just about having a beautiful celebration, though it was beautiful. It was about proving to myself that I'd succeeded despite them, not because of them. That I'd built something real and valuable when they'd predicted I'd struggle. That being overlooked made me stronger, more determined, more capable. And when my daughter is old enough to understand, I'll tell her about why some of her family isn't in her life. I'll teach her that love is demonstrated through actions, not words. That family isn't obligatory, it's earned. That she should never accept being overlooked or undervalued, no matter who's doing it. The wedding my parents chose to skip while funding my sister's taught me the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success. It's building something so beautiful that people who dismissed you finally realize what they lost. And then it's having the strength to keep that beauty for yourself and the people who actually deserve it. Have you ever been the overlooked child while your sibling got everything? Have you succeeded despite your family rather than because of them? Have you had to set boundaries with family members who only valued you once you had something they wanted? Share your stories in the comments below. I want to hear about times you chose yourself over family obligation and how it turned out. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about invisible children who became visible through success and the families who realized too late what they'd lost. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that being overlooked doesn't mean you're not valuable. It means the people doing the overlooking are blind. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the best wedding gift you can give yourself is the freedom to celebrate without people who never celebrated you.